year is 1763. A rumble of discontent sweeps through the American colonies. The continuous westward expansion of the people in the colonies has been ordered to come to a halt. In far-off England, the king has issued a proclamation.
The American colonists must not go beyond the crest of the Appalachians.
Beyond the mountains are fierce tribes of Indians and the warring French. The king has few troops. He can guarantee no protection beyond this line. The colonists are few in number. There is plenty of untaken land in the north and in the south. Why do they feel that an open frontier to the west is so important? In the beginning, America is a frontier of Europe. To the New World, in tiny ships, come people in search of a better life. In the Europe from which most have fled, a man is a prisoner in the class to which he is born. Here in the New World, there was greater opportunity for Europeans to be free. The abundant land waiting just beyond the forest is a promise to the landless, a challenge to the pioneer, a place to escape from intolerance. But what lies out there in the wilderness? Fearfully at first, some colonists move into the forest. They test their strength against Indians and wild animals. They learn to adapt to new situations, new challenges. And as they move further west, as they begin to conquer the wilderness, as they grow in strength and confidence, they begin to change. Frontier life begins to breed a restless new kind of man, used to freedom, intolerant of restraints. By 1750, from a handful of tiny settlements on the edge of the Atlantic, the colonists have penetrated to the foothills of the Appalachians. But in 1763, the continuous westward expansion of the people in the colonies is ordered to halt. The king warns he can give no protection beyond the Appalachians. But America has bred men who do not want protection, men who refuse to be stopped. In the backwoods of North Carolina, a frontiersman sits in his rude cabin and dreams of the land beyond the mountains.
A fellow that's been there told me there's grass thick with deer, and there's turkeys. So many there's just not room for all of them to fly at the same time.
His name is Daniel Boone, one of the new breed. He blazes the wilderness trail and then returns to lead others into the new colony he and the land promoters who have hired him are beginning to call Transylvania. And the further men like this go west, less and less they need the king far away across the ocean. Why pay him a tax on tea? A tax on salt? A tax on anything? Men like this are beginning to say,
who needs a king anyway?
By the time of the Revolution, men in the West are ready and eager to fight. George Rogers Clark leads a small band of frontiersmen to raid British forts in the Northwest. He wins a victory at Vincennes that lays the basis for claims to much of the Northwest territory. When the peace treaty with England is signed, The western boundary of the new republic reaches all the way to the Mississippi River. Now the Continental Congress begins to pass a series of ordinances guaranteeing the orderly development of the West. Settlers venturing into the new territories are guaranteed their full rights as American citizens. They are given the opportunity to buy land at auction. Minimum price, $1 an acre. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 prohibits slavery in the territory north of the Ohio River. Soldiers who have fought in the Revolutionary War spend their mustering out pay and journey west to buy land in the new territories. Hard times in the East brings a surge of new settlers. So many people flock west that by 1792, the territory that Daniel Boone has called Transylvania is accepted into the Union as the new state of Kentucky. By 1796, Tennessee becomes a state. By 1803, Ohio. And in 1803, the country once again stretches its borders. Thomas Jefferson makes the Louisiana Purchase and doubles the nation's size. Now the western boundary of the United States stretches all the way to the Rocky Mountains. To explore the new territory, Jefferson sends an expedition headed by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. Lewis and Clark's assignment: to go where none but Indians have gone before, to chart the unknown, to fill in the empty spaces on the map. And so begins an incredible journey, exploring rivers, making friends with the Indians, and learning their ways. Crossing on foot the Continental Divide. 28 months later, they report,
Honorable Thomas Jefferson, sir, in obedience to your orders, we have penetrated the continent of North America to the Pacific Ocean.
Lewis and Clark's report of rich virgin lands awaiting pioneers fires the imagination of the American people and sends a new wave of settlers west. Explorers are followed by fur trappers, backwoodsmen, far-roaming mountain men are followed by farmers. Now, with Eastern manufacturers looking eagerly to the expanding market in the West, and Western farmers shipping their crops east, there is a demand for new and better means of transportation. Better roads and turnpikes are built. In 1811, the National Road is begun. When it is finally completed, many years later, it is 60 feet wide and stretches 600 miles from Maryland to Illinois. Over this broad national road travel covered wagons and the Western mails. Inns spring up. Down the road come droves of cattle herded east to market. Sometimes the road is as crowded as the main street of a small town. The National Road connects at Wheeling with the Ohio River. From here, Western travelers may continue their journey by flatboat. Water transportation is cheap and comfortable. In 1825, the Great Erie Canal is finally completed and becomes the most famous highway to the West. Settlers can now travel by water from New York to Buffalo and across the Great Lakes to Chicago, gateway to the West. Newly arrived immigrants from Europe join New Englanders and New Yorkers and travel westward on the Erie in ever-increasing numbers. The West is beginning to fill up, beginning to feel its muscles, beginning to make its voice heard. By 1830, 1/3 of the American people live west of the Appalachians. Here life is hard. Comforts are few. But people learn to help one another. Sharing a common hardship, facing common danger, the people develop the idea they are equal. Here, a man is valued, not for family, for inherited wealth, for years of schooling, but for what he can do. The West has a deep faith in democracy and the ability of the common man. Every adult white male is eligible to vote and to hold public office. Many of these new voters, Western farmers who support Andrew Jackson for president, want two things. First, they want cheap money, easy credit so they can buy more land. And second, because some of the best land is owned by Indians, because the Indian is a constant threat, they want the Indians removed. Under Jackson, the Indian Removal Act is carried out. In 1830, the government begins to move all the tribes east of the Mississippi, west, into tribal lands in Oklahoma, which is to be theirs forever. For many tribes, the result is tragic. The Cherokees, for example, a civilized nation, had developed their own written language. Nevertheless, they are removed by force and marched in the dead of winter to their new lands. So many die along the way. The Cherokees call this the Trail of Tears. The American hunger for more and more land continues unchecked. By 1845, a New York journalist coins the phrase manifest destiny, which says that as a people, we have a special destiny and that nothing can stop America's westward expansion until the nation reaches the Pacific Ocean. At a 4th of July picnic, a Western orator compares Americans to the buffalo.
Land enough! Land enough! Make way, I say, for the young American buffalo. He has not yet got land enough. I tell you, we will give him Oregon for his summer shade and Texas for his winter pasture.
The mood of the people is expansionist. 1845, Texas enters Union. 1846, Oregon country ours. 1848, as a result of the war with Mexico, the United States acquires a vast new area in the Southwest. Already Brigham Young has led his people into the new Utah territory. By 1847, the Mormons have settled on the shores of the Great Salt Lake and have begun to build a new Zion. In 1848, the cry of gold is heard in California and starts a new stampede west. But already an issue is heating up that threatens to divide the nation. Slavery. Shall the new Western territories come into the Union as free or slave states? From the beginning of the nation, the issue of slavery in the new territories has been important. As early as 1787, the Northwest Ordinance had prohibited slavery in the new territory north of the Ohio River. In 1820, under the Missouri Compromise, with the single exception of Missouri, everything north of 3630 is closed to slavery. But as each new Western state applies for admission, the issue revives. Since slavery already exists in Texas, Texas is admitted as a slave state. Oregon enters free. Under the Compromise of 1850, California comes in as a free state. But Utah and New Mexico are to decide for themselves whether or not they want slavery. In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act replaces the Missouri Compromise. The region west of Iowa and Missouri is to be divided into two new territories, Kansas and Nebraska. And the people of these new territories are to vote whether or not they want slavery. The result is disaster. Pro and anti-slavery elements send people to influence the vote. Abolitionist societies send in settlers equipped with wagons, loaded with rifles. Pro-slavery elements send armed desperados. Some southern states send in their militia. In the struggle between North and South, the West becomes a bloody battleground. The fighting in Kansas and Nebraska is a rehearsal for the Civil War. (1862). In the midst of war, Abraham Lincoln signs two bills which are to have immense importance to the future of the West. The great westward movement of the American people has skipped the Great Plains, a land with so little water it is known as the Great American Desert. Now Lincoln signs the Homestead Act, which gives 160 acres of free land to encourage those who will settle here and to link the Atlantic coast with the Pacific. He signs a bill authorizing the construction of the long dreamed of Transcontinental Railroad. (1869), the Golden Spike that joins the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific is hammered into place. And with the coming of the first Transcontinental Railroad, the West begins its period of greatest expansion. The Western railroads have land to sell. Agents are sent abroad to advertise for immigrants in their native languages. People flock to the West from all over the world. A writer describes a scene in a Western town.
Trains swarming with immigrants, all seeking land.
Because so little rain falls on the Great Plains, the settlers learn to rely on windmills to pump water from deep wells. Because there is almost no timber, they learn to build their houses out of earth, learn to live in sod huts. And by their courage and their ingenuity, they begin to transform the Great Plains into one of the great granaries of the world. The coming of the Transcontinental Railroad brings the first great cattle drives. Cattle are driven to meet the railroad at Dodge City or Abilene. To the Indian, however, the railroad brings hunger. Buffalo crossing the plains in huge herds are a danger to locomotives and passengers. Hunters are hired to slaughter the herds. Of the once great herds, nothing is left but the bones. Frantic with hunger, desperate over the invasion of their lands, the Indians attack. To protect the settlers, the railroads and the wagon trains, soldiers are sent. The retaliation is savage. An overeager colonel, George Custer, pursues a Sioux raiding party and is led into a trap. At Little Bighorn, Custer and his troops are massacred. Angry, the army retaliates. The surrender of the Sioux is the beginning of the end of armed Indian resistance. By 1885, almost every Indian in the West has been placed on a reservation. The Old West is vanishing. Where teepees stood and campfires burned, towns and villages and cities are beginning to rise. In 1890, the director of census is saying,
The country's unsettled area has been so broken into isolated bodies of settlement, there can hardly be said to be a frontier left.
Entering the 20th century, Americans took a look back and asked themselves what the open frontier in the West had meant in our history. Had it helped shape the character of the American people? From the beginning, the land waiting just beyond the forest was the promise of a chance for a better life. The promise gave hope, bred optimism. Conquering the wilderness, the people developed strength and self-reliance. Always on the move, we became a restless people. And sometimes, the easy opportunity for change made us wasteful. Often it was easier to use up than to preserve our natural resources. Life along the edge of the frontier was harsh and frequently violent. But sharing a common experience, people learned to help one another. It is the courage and the confidence, the boundless optimism, the ability to pick oneself up from failure and try again that are the characteristics Americans carry forward into the new frontiers, wherever they may be.